Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to How Change Capital Can Strengthen Arts Organizations. Thank you for joining us today for what we hope will be a dynamic discussion about how a special type of investment, change capital, can be used to help arts organizations adapt in creative ways for their future viability and vibrancy. My name is Rebecca Thomas. I'm Vice President and Director of National Arts Initiatives here at Nonprofit Finance Fund. I'm joined today by my colleague, Rodney Christopher, Vice President of Consulting Services, and my partner here at NFF on all of our national work in the arts. I am particularly pleased to welcome 4 colleagues from 2 organizations that we work very closely with as part of the Leading for the Future initiative. This is a unique program that you'll be hearing quite a bit about today and that is generously supported by the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation. Joining me today from Alvin, Ailey Dance Foundation are Thomas Cott, Director of Marketing, and Amanda Nelson, Deputy Director of Development. From the Wooster Group, we have Cynthia Hedstrom, Producer, and Jamie Poskin, Development and Web Manager. In our short time together today, we will introduce you briefly to the concepts of capitalization, what it is and why it matters for arts organizations, particularly in times like the present, when the economy continues to be challenging and the artistic landscape continues to shift, causing organizations to adapt in many different creative ways. Then I'll ask my colleagues at Ailey and Wooster to talk about their experiences using Change Capital, and in particular to share what they've learned so far that has broader relevance for the arts and culture field and sector. A few housekeeping items before we get started. During this webinar, everyone on the phone will be muted due to the large audience size. We encourage you to submit questions that you have for the presenters at any time during the session, and we thank those of you who have submitted questions to us in advance. To submit a question, there's a feature on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and you can type your question right in the box there. Within a few days, we will also send you an email with a link to today's presentation and a recording. So let's get started. Over the past few years, the topic of capitalization in the arts has received increased attention. National and local arts funders are looking at their communities and asking themselves, how do we ensure that arts organizations have the types and amounts of capital that they need to produce and sustain excellent art in a rapidly changing economic and artistic environment? Nonprofits, too, are grappling with many issues of capitalization, even if they don't necessarily call it that. At NFF, we work with dozens of organizations that are balancing the economic realities of today with the need to creatively adapt for the future. Healthy finances are really central to achieving that balance. So simply stated, what is capitalization? Capitalization, as we define it, is having enough of the right kinds of financial resources to pursue an artistic vision and mission over the long term. As everyone on this webinar knows and deeply understands, great art is created all the time with very limited funds. Yet we see, sadly, nearly every day at NFF, and particularly in times like the present, that great arts organizations lack the flexible money that they need to realize their artistic ambitions. If the artistic ambition of an organization requires it to be around producing great art over the long term, that organization has a responsibility to plan for its financial health. In the words of one of our dear colleagues, who is also a participant in this initiative, Megan Wanlis-Zala of City Company, capitalization means greater artistic freedom. So what does appropriate capitalization look like? First, it's important to point out that capitalization is really about the strength and composition of an organization's balance sheet. Its assets, what it owns, its liabilities, what it owes, and its net worth or its savings. Capitalization done right supports liquidity, adaptability, and durability. What do we mean by that? Well, liquidity is about having access to cash to meet daily operating needs. Does an organization have enough money in its checking account to manage cash flow and to deal with the unexpected? Adaptability is about having flexible funds that allow an organization to change, transform, course correct as circumstances change. It can involve repositioning, collaborating, growth, or even contracting as appropriate. And durability is about having the funds that are sufficient to address a range of future needs. It can be seen in the presence of buildings, permanently restricted endowments, and long-term savings. Organizations that do durability right invest in liquidity alongside their durability. So for example, if an organization desires, requires, or has fixed assets, they also need to have a long-term reserve to continue to preserve and maintain those fixed assets, those facilities, over the long term. Similarly, if an organization has an endowment, the endowment funds need to be appropriately sized so that it can generate sufficient reliable revenue to support its operations over the long term. While these sort of bubbles on the slide are presented on an even keel alongside of each other, there actually is a hierarchy of need within every organization. Not every organization requires equal amounts of capital providing liquidity, adaptability, and durability. And what we see all the time at NFF is that organizations focus on durability first, even though it's liquidity that they really need most. Many organizations with sufficient working capital and access to periodic funds to adapt as needed don't ever need to build durable balance sheets. So if the sector is ever to achieve improved liquidity and adaptability, we need to get a whole lot clearer about two different kinds of money, revenue and capital. They're quite different, and we can't commingle them in our thinking, our grant requests, our grant making, or our financial statements. Revenue is about doing what an organization does day in and day out. It pays for what an organization already does for business as usual. It can be restricted, it can be general operating support, it can be earned, and it can be contributed. The key is that the combination of all of these sources should relatively reliably cover annual costs of both programs and operations. Capital is longer-term money. It allows an organization to change what it is capable of doing, to build and to refresh the underlying business and the artwork. Capital pays for changing in many different ways. It can be about doing more, it can be about doing less, or it can be about doing something at a greater level of quality or more efficiently and effectively. It can be used to build new audiences, to become more virtual, to become more participatory, or even, as we saw with our colleagues from the Merce Cunningham Dance Foundation, to gracefully go out of business. When capital is used to make organizational level change, it's important to remember that it needs to be invested in ways that allow the organization to actually sustain that change once it's taken place. So that means investing in the internal capabilities that build the revenue that is then going to help the organization pay for what it already does once the change has taken place. So where does capital come from? Working capital for liquidity is most commonly built through the steady and gradual accumulation of surpluses over time. Durability and adaptability are often achieved through the raising of occasional periodic infusions of capital. And capital can come from a campaign, it can come from the strategic use of debt, it can come from special fundraising, but it's usually raised periodically in larger sums of money. A capital campaign, I think it's important to call out, doesn't actually have to be for a fixed asset like a building or endowment. We're seeing increasingly special grant programs that are prioritizing the creation of liquid reserves or investments in plans for change and adaptability. And today you're going to hear about one of those programs. And now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Rodney to tell you a little bit more about the Leading for the Future program.
Thanks, Rebecca. As you can see here, there's a group of 10 excellent artistic organizations who were selected to participate in this initiative that we're calling Leading for the Future. It is funded by the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, and it is designed by NFF and the folks at Duke. It is, in fact, an experimental program. We're investing multi-year capital to help these organizations pursue plans to adapt at a time of economic and artistic flux. This is not grant-making as usual. It's the first program that we are aware of to articulate the need for change capital and apply sizable funding toward that end. Each organization is looking at changes that allow changes in their impact for how they create and deliver art, as well as looking at the underlying business and operations that ultimately we collectively hope will continue to sustain their artistic agenda. And here's sort of an outline of what the initiative is aiming to do. What you see here is that each organization is receiving $1 million, and each organization has determined the drawdown schedule that works for their plan. We also provided $75,000 to each of them for the planning process that led to determining how best to use those funds. As my colleague Rebecca pointed out, this $1 million is capital. It is not revenue. It is to be used on a one-time basis to make change in the organization. The planning grants were provided to help organizations develop and refine their strategy to prepare multi-year financials and establish metrics for tracking progress against goals. The money could be used to hire consultants, to enable participants to step back and really think about the financial and artistic implications of their plans. Most of our colleagues are making organization-level change or change that has organization-wide implications. These are not just project grants. Important, we did not dictate how the money would be spent, with one caveat. It cannot be spent on business as usual or for facilities and endowments. It must be used to impact long-term change, including the capabilities that will allow each organization to sustain that change progressively over time. It is effectively risk money, and we'll talk more about that later. NFF is not just serving the role of program officer, but also as consultant. And as you might imagine, this is a delicate balancing act, and it's an unusual model that we're sure our groups have lots to say about. All organizations are receiving consultative support in developing financial plans that support their artistic goals. Many continue to call on NFF for assistance during the implementation phase, whether that be to help them think through issues of leadership, to engage with their boards or funders around issues of capitalization, or to assist them in rescoping certain elements of their plans as circumstances evolve. Finally, an explicit component of this initiative is the dissemination of what we are learning. Today is one example. We encourage you to check out our Case for Change Capital in the Arts, a recent publication about this initiative. We will make this available when we email you with a link to today's presentation. With that said, I'd now like to introduce our two organizations. From the Alvin and Ailey Dance Foundation, we have Thomas Cott and Amanda Nelson.
Thanks, Rodney. We're just going to take 1 second to switch out to, how do I do that? Okay. Oh. There we go.
Okay. So in 2008, we faced a challenge. How should we address the increase in our patrons' use of technology? We wanted Ailey to be on the leading edge, and so we looked for a bold way to change the way we did business. The Change Capital grant we received from the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, administered by the Nonprofit Finance Fund, has given us the opportunity to do just that. Since our project began in 2009, we have transformed the way we use electronic media, deepening our engagement with our current patrons and expanding our base to include new patrons. We didn't expect to see financial gain right away. Instead, we sought to build incremental revenue over time. This incremental income is derived not just from additional ticket sales, but also from donations, class fees, and merchandise sales. We have already seen incremental change, and we are projected to more than earn back the initial investment we received by the end of next year. And we're looking into the future, examining how we can remain nimble in our plans as new technological tools become available and as patrons' online habits change, and we're looking at how to sustain the incremental growth in revenue that we have begun to enjoy.
Our project had 5 goals: increase online patron engagement, build online community, increase cross-patronage, optimize e-commerce, and shift a percentage of our ad buy from traditional media to digital platforms. Throughout the project, we have been rigorous in defining benchmarks and analyzing these metrics to see if our efforts have been successful. In the slides that follow, we will talk through the impact that Change Capital has made on the Ailey company.
But first, a little bit of context. While many people know about our main performing company, the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, you may not know about other areas of our organization, which include Ailey 2, our junior company, the Ailey School, the Ailey Extension, which are dance and fitness classes for the public, Ailey's arts and education and community programs, rentals of our black box theater and 12 studios, and Ailey merchandise. So, the question is how to engage and expand such a widespread audience. Electronic tools have proven to be very effective.
We focused on 6 ways to engage and expand our audience, and they are through the creation of a central database, improved email practices, more strategic use of online banner ads, a complete overhaul of our website, social media and social marketing, and mobile phones. In the few minutes that we have left, we're going to run quickly through each of these.
One of the first things we tackled was the creation of a central database. Before we started this project, our patron information was stored in many different databases using a variety of different pieces of software. We never had a complete picture of one person's interaction with the Ailey company. Now, we have one central repository for this information, and it has proved to be useful for cross-selling, donor cultivation, and more. By having a central database, we've also been able to do some valuable analysis of our patrons' behavior. For instance, we learned that the average ticket buyer for our New York season spent 34% more on their tickets if they also attended classes at the Ailey Extension. And perhaps, not surprisingly, the average donor who bought tickets spent even more, 168% more on tickets to our New York season.
Next, we're going to talk about email, which has the best return on investment of any of the electronic tools that we're currently using. For example, for every dollar we spent on email to promote our 2011 New York season, we earned $25 in ticket revenue. Over the last few years, we've expanded our email strategy to include list segmentation, testing of different designs, subject lines, the time of day and day of the week we send them, as well as the frequency with which we send messages. Now comes a very complicated chart, but we're not going to take the time today to talk through each step of this highly detailed process that we set up to respond to how people interact or don't interact with emails that we send them. But I just wanted to point out that flashing red box on the left side of your screen that reads, "Tag computer with 1x1 pixel." Now, this is a technique that many for-profit businesses have done for some time, but still a relatively new practice in the nonprofit world. Our ability to place that invisible 1x1 tag, pixel tag, on a patron's computer allows us to send follow-up emails to anyone who doesn't act right away or doesn't complete the sale. And we've learned that these follow-up emails have a much higher conversion rate compared to our more general emails.
So tagging computers with an invisible 1x1 pixel has also allowed us to be much more strategic about how and where we place online banner advertising. Whenever someone visits our website for the first time, their computer is invisibly tagged, and that allows us not only to serve them banner ads, but with the help of an outside vendor, we can now also serve banner ads to their social network of friends. As a result, the size of our online prospect pool has grown exponentially. Because we pay just for the ads that are seen by the people we want to target, we can afford to place our banner ads virtually anywhere they browse online. For example, here's an Ailey ad that ran on allrecipes.com. It was only visible to people we had identified as likely prospects for buying tickets to our New York season. It may seem a little Big Brother-ish to have our ads follow people wherever they are browsing on the web, but the high click-through and view-through rates for these ads has shown this as an effective tool and a way to communicate with our best prospects. By investing some of our change capital in new tracking tools, we can now follow the entire process from a person seeing one of our banner ads all the way through the transaction of buying a ticket, which has allowed us, for the very first time, to measure our return on investment. For instance, during our 2011 New York season, for every dollar we spent on targeted banner ads, we earned over $8 in ticket revenue. And as more and more people visit our website, we continue to add tens of thousands of new prospects to our online pixel pool each month for future marketing campaigns.
Another big change we implemented in this project was a complete rethink of our website. Now, we don't have time to discuss the details of that whole process, but since we know that email is the most profitable digital tool we currently have at our disposal, we thought it would be worthwhile to show you how we redesigned our website to emphasize email sign-up. This is a snapshot of what our site used to look like, and you can see that it was filled with lots of different items, all vying for the reader's attention, making it pretty hard to find where to sign up for our email list. And that's where it was. This is the way our new website looks, and you can see that the visual clutter has been cleared away, and the email sign-up is prominently featured at the top right-hand corner of every page of our site. As a result of making this one change, our email list sign-ups increased by 46% in the first year alone after we launched our new website design.
Next, we'll talk about social media, which has proven to be a wonderful way to achieve several of our organizational goals, including increasing online patron engagement and building our online community. By focusing our efforts solely on Facebook, rather than spreading out onto other social networks like Twitter, we have built up a large and terrifically engaged group of about 170,000 Facebook fans around the world. And our social marketing campaigns have been able to build on our social media success. For example, in the lead up to our New York season last December, we ran a Facebook ads that targeted two groups, our existing Facebook fans in the New York metro area and the social network connections of those fans, particularly those who match the demographic and psychographic profiles of our ticket buyers. Over 10,000 users engaged in some way, including video plays and new likes for our Facebook page, and this campaign received a total of 3 million impressions. We also ran a sweepstakes on Facebook, offering the winner tickets to our opening night gala. This collaboration between the marketing and development departments leveraged an existing fundraising event to promote our overall New York City Center season and help build our online fan base. Among the many benefits we saw from the sweepstakes included adding over 5,000 new people to our Facebook community in the New York area, and we collected over 2,000 new email addresses to our database, since one of the requirements of entering the sweepstakes was providing that information. Between the sweepstakes and the Facebook ads we ran, we also generated ticket sales. Based on our calculations, for every dollar we spent on Facebook marketing, we earned over $4 in ticket revenue.
Last but not least, mobile phones have become an increasingly important part of our electronic strategy, as more and more of our patrons have gotten smartphones and rely on them to access the Internet. That's why we've invested time and money into optimizing our emails. See how the subject line fits the width of the phone screen. And we've also optimized our website for viewing on mobile phones. This is what our regular website looks like on a smartphone, and this is the mobile-friendly version. As you can see, it's a streamlined version of the main desktop version, but we didn't forget about the importance of growing our email database, and so, again, email sign-up is still featured prominently on our mobile site.
We'll end here with the 3 most important things we've learned through this initiative. The first being, be careful about overreaching. For instance, we thought that our extension class takers would be good targets for buying tickets to our New York season and vice versa, but the conversion rate for both has remained low, and we need more work in this area. That said, as you may recall from earlier in our presentation, we did see that people who both take class and buy tickets spend more money on tickets, so we know we're onto something, but we were a bit overambitious with that particular initial benchmark. And speaking of benchmarks, the analysis of results has been central to our project's success, allowing us to refine our efforts on an ongoing basis. Lastly, it was really important to get early buy-in from our artistic and executive leaders. They embraced this project from the start, and it sent a message that affected how all of us at Ailey rethought our way of doing business. As a result, we are working much more collaboratively to cross-promote, cross-sell, upsell, and find other ways to engage our current and prospective audiences using technology. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. We're now going to hand this over to Cynthia and Jamie from the Wooster group. Give us just a moment to get their deck up.
Good afternoon. This is Cynthia. In case you don't know about the Wooster Group is an ensemble company of theater artists who make work for live performance and media. Our core company is about 19 people, including the artistic director, Elizabeth LeCompte, and actors and technical artists and administrators. We also work with artists from a pool of about 50 associates on a project-by-project basis. Our home base is the Performing Garage in New York City, where we have created and performed our experimental works for over 35 years. Our Leading for the Future Award, which was awarded in 2009, and since that time we have refined and adapted our plan on a yearly basis, reflecting the changing realities both within our organization and from external conditions. The focus of our initial LFF proposal was to stabilize and increase earned income through 3 initiatives. First, a sustained partnership with the Baryshnikov Art Center for Wooster Group performances in New York City, which allowed us to perform in a larger theater than the Performing Garage, which only has about 90 seats. Developing 2 to 4 long-term partnerships with national and/or international presenters for Wooster Group touring, and making our archive more accessible and offering material for sale. And you see 4 covers of DVDs that we have produced since the launch of this plan. Inevitably, we reassessed and made adjustments to our plan each year. With the Baryshnikov Art Center, in fiscal year 2010, the first year of our LFF investment, we opened the Jerome Robbins Theater, a new theater at BAC's space on West 37th Street. While the opening was a major accomplishment, attendance and box office fell short of our projections, which prompted a strategic rethinking of our marketing efforts. Over the next year, we revamped our ticket price structure and marketing strategies, focusing more on reaching audiences through a new video blog, through e-blasts, and social media. In fiscal year 11, this resulted in a 110% increase in web traffic at the Wooster Group. On Facebook and Twitter, we went from almost no activity to over half of our referral web traffic coming in from these social media streams. And it resulted in that year in a 44% increase in average weekly ticket income. We continued to expand the parameters of our partnership with BAC. In fiscal year 12, we performed at the Ringling International Arts Festival in Florida, which is curated by BAC. And in 2013, we'll be working on a project featuring Mikhail Baryshnikov performing with our company, which will be presented in their theater in fiscal year 14. Regarding touring partnerships, in line with our initial plan, we developed a relationship with Red Cat in Los Angeles, where we perform a 2-week run every year, providing reliable touring income and building an audience base for our work in Los Angeles. However, we found that most other presenters were reluctant to make a multi-year commitment. They faced financial uncertainties and wanted flexibility in shaping their programs. With them, we have developed long-term touring relationships that are more open. In this way, we return every few years to the Edinburgh International Festival, the Holland Festival, and the Festival d'Automne in Paris. We also used investment capital to sweeten the deal in negotiations for commissioning funds and additional touring. A new component of our plan is that it was not in our original LFF proposal or our original plan, but we sort of, through the conversations with LFF and NFF, we determined that it was important for us to create a risk reserve. And we have now established a reserve that is equal to approximately 30% of our budget. You can see on this page some of the projects that we have launched that we would not have been able to seize the moment and act as quickly on if we had not had this risk reserve. The reserve has bought us time while we fundraise to support these new initiatives, and it also provides backup for the unforeseen. In the center, lower part of the screen, you see an image of our daily blog. This is a new initiative that is both an artistic and a marketing project, and it features a daily video posting that provides a window into the Wooster Group company operations. On the upper right-hand side, a collaboration with the Royal Shakespeare Company for a new production of Troilus and Cressida. We launched into this project with some seed money from the RSC, but without having full funding for the project. But it was, we felt this was a strong project for the Wooster Group that would help move us forward in many ways, which we'll talk about later. We also moved quickly on a new project called Early Plays, which was an experiment to bring in a guest director, Richard Maxwell, to work with our company. This was the first production that was directed by someone other than Elizabeth LeCompte since the mid-1980s. As I said, in some cases we had seed money to begin these projects, but we knew that we had to raise significant additional funds to be able to realize them fully. So in line with our LFF proposal, we have seen a stabilization of our earned income, and Jamie will present some financial data.
So right now you're looking at a chart of our box office income stretching from before the investment kicked in through the present and projecting into the future. The Wooster Group has a fairly long development cycle for new theater works. We don't always present a new work in New York every year. So in order to compare apples to apples, we first sort of looked at years where we're presenting a new work in New York City, which were sort of our bigger box office years. If you note, FY08 was a particularly an unusually high year for us since we premiered Hamlet, which is, of course, a very popular play. But if you look at FY09, which is a more typical pre-LFF investment year for box office income, you can see that looking ahead to FY11, the next new project, that we stabilized earned income from box office and it grew slightly, and we also project some significant growth in box office income in FY13 when we premiere the Royal Shakespeare Company project here in New York. Where we've already seen some major growth is in sort of the development years. When we're developing new work, we typically will present a repertory work in New York or another project that requires less rehearsal time than a new Wooster Group production. This includes this year's production in FY12 of the Richard Maxwell collaboration. And as you can see here, compared to FY06 and FY07, FY10 and FY12 were a big bump up on these repertory and collaboration development years for the Wooster Group in terms of box office income. Our touring and commissioning income operates on a similar cycle. If you look at sort of the years where we're developing new work, we tend to tour a little bit more in these years, and we also are using the commissioning money that comes in to support the development of these projects in those years. And as you can see, we've seen growth and stabilization and growth on this year cycle as the LFF investment has kicked in. And if you also look at the years where we're presenting new work in New York City, again, stabilization and growth. Lastly, media sales, which isn't quite as large of a chunk of earned income, but as you can see, before the LFF investment kicked in FY08 and 09, we had very little income from DVD sales. But in FY10, our first LFF year, we released 3 new DVDs, which shot that income up quite a bit. In FY11, we continued to sell those DVDs, and in FY12, we released a new DVD, and we plan to release a new DVD each year, sort of looking into the future to add another chunk of earned income to our yearly projections. So if we combine all 3 of these areas together and sort of look at our numbers a couple years before the LFF investment and into the investment and projecting into the future, it becomes clear that the investment has sort of done what it's meant to do. It's helped us stabilize and increase earned income now and into the future. And although it wasn't a part of our initial LFF proposal, our LFF-related activities have led to an increase in unearned income as well. The risk reserve is meant to buy us time while we fundraise to support new initiatives that we want to act quickly on. And since FY09, we've been able to increase foundation and government grants significantly enough to support these new initiatives that we've launched without having to dip into our risk reserve, which is great. We're also in the midst of an individual donor campaign to support the Royal Shakespeare Company collaboration with the goal of covering the extra costs associated with that project and also of increasing the number and level of individual contributions in the long term, sort of seizing this idea that we're working with a company that's different from us. But overall, I think the takeaway is that improving our balance sheet has really made us more attractive to funders.
Even if you look at the company photo of us in toga.
That's really great. Thank you so much, both to our friends at the Wooster Group and at Alvin Ailey Dance Foundation. We actually have some time for questions, and we got a few in advance. And so what we'd like to do is pose the ones we got in advance to the group here. And if you would like, you can type into the questions part of your screen if you have questions for us. And the good news is, if we find that we don't have enough questions to get us to the end time of 4 p.m., we can end early, but we prefer to hear your questions. So the first comes to us, and it says, can you talk a little bit about how you respond to funders who don't see this as part of their giving strategies? And my colleague Rebecca and I, we are operating from the assumption that the word "this" refers to change capital. So what might we say to funders who don't see change capital, meaning large investments for sort of generating new income and helping to stabilize organizations? The answer really comes in two forms. We would say to you, as Rebecca pointed out earlier, that we want you to think about revenue and capital separately. It is absolutely fine and appropriate for not every funder to provide capital because, in fact, revenue is necessary for the success of the organizations that we care about. And so the real question becomes, how might you provide revenue with a little more nuance than perhaps you do so today? Our suggestion, and we'd be happy to talk about this offline further, is first and foremost, when you are providing project money, it is really, really important that you are helping to fund the full cost of that project, or that you feel relatively comfortable that the organization is receiving the funds from someplace else to cover the full cost of that project without having to dip in to their general support, because that is where organizations get into trouble. They need to be able to cover their full project cost. Similarly, one of the best things that any funder can do for an organization they care about is to provide general operating support. Such dollars are flexible, and when organizations are in a position to generate surpluses, they can put those funds into the kind of risk reserve that we've heard the Wooster Group explain so well. So that's sort of a high-level answer, and we hope that that is helpful. Another question that came up is, what processes did you use to assess risk along the way to implementing change? And we'd like to invite our colleagues from Ailey and or Wooster to answer that question.
Well, one thing that I can say, this is Amanda from Ailey, is that what's so wonderful about having an investment grant, a true investment grant, is that mitigates risk or actually allows for risk, because it gives you an opportunity to test and to try and to experiment. And that's truly what build capital and change capital is, and that has been truly, truly instrumental in the success of our project.
I would say that we're constantly assessing risk and that it's really a financial picture that we look at, and we make judgments based on whether we feel there's potential for raising the money or earning the money to cover any kind of risk that we're taking. And this is something that we do daily or weekly as projects develop.
Great, thank you. We have one more question from before, which is how might these concepts around capital apply to community-based arts organizations who often have a very different revenue model than more traditional performing arts organizations? Rebecca, do you want to take that?
Sure. Well, I think it's important to say at the outset that it's very true that community-based arts organizations may have very different needs for both revenue and capital than more institutionally based arts organizations or performing arts organizations. But I also think that many of the principles that are important to NFF and to this initiative still hold true for community-based arts organizations. These organizations still very much need to cover their costs on a relatively reliable basis with some combination of earned and contributed support. They also need, just like any other arts organization, to periodically adapt and change as circumstances change. And so while the amount of capital that they need and perhaps even the frequency with which they need capital will change, there's certainly still very much a need for reliable revenue to cover whatever the cost structure might be, as well as periodic capital to contribute to periodic change and adaptation.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. So we've gotten a number of questions. Thank you all very much. The first is, would Ailey share the names of their technology partner or partners for email and pixel tagging?
Sure, absolutely. The vendor we use for the web pixeling is called 33 Across. It's one of a number of companies that does this for primarily for-profit businesses. And for our email provider, we switched recently to a company called eWay Direct, and they are different from a lot of email services that are tied to ticketing software like Tessitura or Ticketmaster or that kind of thing, because they are an e-commerce. They're not just about ticketing; they're about all kinds of e-commerce. So they'll have the technology already built into their system to track all the different aspects of the email process that we do, and it's all automated, which, as I should have mentioned before, is really been a key element to our success. Because if we had to do everything that we did on a manual basis, we couldn't have accomplished, a third of what we accomplished.
Great, thanks, Thomas. So our next question is, do you think this change capital support is a kind of venture philanthropy in terms of capacity building, outcome-driven, and donor involvement? Rebecca, do you want to take the first stab?
Sure. I mean, we don't necessarily call it venture philanthropy, but I think that it has many similar components. Like venture philanthropists, we're providing multi-year capital that is linked to more reliable revenue at the end of that capital expenditure. Like venture philanthropists, we are very much looking, we do a lot of financial planning. We request benchmarks from all of the participants who are involved in the initiative. They are tracking their progress against both artistic metrics as well as technological metrics and financial metrics. Each of the participants in this initiative have a 5-year financial plan with projections of revenue and expenses going out to 2014. So there are certainly things that we have requested as part of this work that venture philanthropists might also request as part of their investments. This initiative is not about growth, and I think a lot of venture philanthropists are seeking to scale the organizations with whom they work. We actually are very indifferent as to whether organizations get bigger, get smaller, or do work more effectively as part of this work. The change needs to be relatively well sustained, but it's not so important that it be associated with growth.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. We actually have several questions, so I'm going to do a little picking here. Can you scroll down just a bit here? Great, thank you. So here's a question. With both the Ailey and Wooster projects, it sounds like they were being carried out above and beyond staff members' existing duties. How did you carve out the additional staff time required to carry out your experiments? Did you have to hire additional people?
Well, actually, part of our grant involved the purchase of a cloning machine. No, I'm just kidding. I wish they existed. We actually did included as part of our grant the hiring of 2 additional staff members, one of whose responsibilities was fully underwritten by the grant, and another one whose salary was partially underwritten by the grant. And it's all about content creation, essentially, for all the extra web-based things that we were creating.
For the Wooster Group, we did an organizational restructuring. It wasn't major, but dividing responsibilities differently, and brought in a part-time administrator to help carry some of the load. And for our blog project, we found it was necessary to hire a full-time filmmaker editor who is part of the Wooster Group now. And he also had an assistant who was working with him part-time. So we have brought in extra staff to help carry out these new initiatives.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So this is a very sort of complex question, but I think we might find it interesting to try to unpack it a little bit. So the question reads, can you help define business as usual compared to new or increased or robust business as part of staffers' descriptions/salaries while making this case to funders? For example, it is easy to point to a consultant as new, but more challenging to identify how increased social media expenditure in-house, for example, staff time or technology, is a useful and viable risk. So at the core of this question, I think, how might we make cases to funders about the value of the kind of money that this initiative is aiming to put out into the field? Since I picked the question, I will attempt to answer it first, and then I look at my colleagues who are all looking at me like, what are you thinking? So I want to kind of pull back from the question a little bit to say, this is absolutely not a science. We are all literally, I remember we sort of got together in 2008, and we had everyone sitting around a table, and those who were outside of New York were on a screen with little rectangle photos, or moving images, I should say. And we talked about the fact that we were literally sort of jumping together into the unknown. And I remember us asking repeatedly, are you sure you're ready for this? Because this is not going to be business as usual. This is going to be really different. And each organization has really thought through what their situation, their circumstances are, and they worked with us to sort of define what they thought made sense. Is it true that you can turn this around and go to any funder in the universe and say, this is what we want, give us money? The answer is probably no. We also think, however, that in conversations we're having with funders, and we are out there having these conversations, funders are really interested in talking about these issues and wanting to be thoughtful in their responses. The most important advice we can offer, I think, and I'll look to my colleagues to amplify this, is pick carefully who it is you go to with this kind of a request. Pick people who really know and understand you, and people who you think are prepared to engage in the conversation about how you might use a chunk of money to make a real difference in your organization. And choose them as people who actually might have either the dollars themselves or can help you find those dollars. This is not for everyone, and it cannot be done all the time. This is one of those situations where the opportunity presented in this case, and we went through a competitive process and we found 10 great organizations. But the truth is, folks have been doing variations on this theme forever. We just attempted to provide a little more clarity around what the it is, and to provide resources at a relatively sizable level up front in a way that some organizations do this a little bit of money at a time. So that's my sort of high-level answer. I hope it's been ever so slightly helpful. I'll look to my colleagues to see if anyone wants to add anything.
I mean, I guess I would just add, in the beginning of your question, you ask about business as usual. There's a certain amount of natural growth that happens in most organizations that are healthy, and we're at Ailey lucky enough to have seen growth over the years and expansion of our programs, especially after we built our permanent home on 55th Street in New York. What we're looking for is some way to, if it was possible, identify tools and mechanisms and tracking ability that we could say, because we did all this stuff, it was on top of that natural growth. And because of the benchmarks we set from the outset, we have been able to essentially prove to ourselves that if we had not done this, we wouldn't have seen that extra amount of growth. And more importantly, that we wouldn't have been able to sustain that amount of growth, because that's the other big linchpin of this project, is that it's not a one-time or even a 4-year project thing. It's supposed to go on and adapt indefinitely. And so that's what we're aiming to do with this project, is change the way that we think about ourselves as an organization and how we communicate and interact, and taking advantage of all, in our case, how technology can be leveraged going forward.
Great, thanks, Thomas. So another question that's relatively straightforward is, could you please ask, what is the spend on social media and marketing as a % of revenue for each organization, and the amounts? I realize none of you has your general ledger available, but perhaps you can give a sort of high-level response to that question.
I mean, at the Wooster Group, we a lot of us work on social media as just a part of our daily routine. It would be tough to quantify people's times. I don't think we have any sort of direct social media expenses. Although, we're posting we're sending our daily video blog post out to Facebook and Twitter every day. And of course the blog has a lot of direct expenses. But in terms of actually, revenues or money spent on the social media itself, it's just our time, which is sort of hard to quantify, but
Yeah, I think the same thing is true for us. One of the reasons that we included as a goal of this project was the shift from traditional media to digital, is because there are savings to be found there in terms of it costs less, frankly, to run banner ads on the web than it does to run a series of large ads in a certain major New York newspaper.
Which will remain nameless.
Which will remain nameless. But as Jamie said, there is staff time involved that is part of the everyday duties of people who are already on staff. So it would be hard to sort of break out or quantify what percentage that is different. But I think ultimately the goal is to try and make it more cost effective than not.
I would also just add that because we made that a change where one year we spent about $50,000 or $60,000 on marketing and had less box office income than we had hoped. We made changes in our marketing structure. The next year we spent about $50,000 on marketing, but saw a great increase in box office income. And so it was really about where we focused our attention and where we put our dollars, and we put more into social media and less into print advertising.
Right. We put more into also paid e-blasts, like reaching beyond our own email list, because we, like Alvin and Ailey, found that email was really one of the best return on investment categories.
Great. This is going really well. We have time for just one more question, and it is, in follow-up to the previous question a while ago, not all foundations give general support grants or overhead support. How do you deal with that? This is a really, really important question, and we thought it might be a way to sort of wrap this conversation. Earlier, I referred to the fact that organizations need to sort of know who their closest friends are and to reach out to those individuals first. The simple fact of the matter is that we're all evolving as a nonprofit sector, and folks who provide money and folks who ask for money are all evolving in terms of how we do that. Your responsibility is to find the resources that best work for you, and as you come across situations where you can engage someone who doesn't fully understand what it is that you need, if you can engage them on understanding what it is that you need, they can give you the money, great. It doesn't make sense to go to a funder who says, I do not offer general operating support, and say, but I need general operating support. That generally isn't going to work in your favor. However, what you do have a responsibility to do is when you're raising money for projects, you want to ask for what it actually costs you to deliver that project, either from the one funder or whatever combination of funding sources it is that you're asking for. One of the mistakes that we see, with good reason, meaning folks want to do the projects that matter to them. They'll take less than it really costs, and the organization suffers a little bit every time. And we would strongly encourage the field to try to do a little bit less of that in order for us to be around for the long term doing great art and engaging people with very interesting things. So